Get out. You're not my child. That's what my dad told me one evening 6 months ago after I refused to buy a $350,000 house for David, my younger brother. After hearing those words, I left my family like my dad wanted. And then, a few months later, they returned to me again with even more unreasonable demands. After those demands, I said no and again chose to disappear from their lives for good. Follow my story and tell me if I was wrong for walking away from my family. Hello everyone, my name is Nolan. I'm 32 years old and working as the chief financial officer for a major corporation in Lubbock, Texas. Today's career is something I built entirely on my own, without help or support from anyone, not even my parents. Right now, I live alone and no longer have any ties with my family. 6 months ago, during a dinner, I cut off all contact with them after a series of unreasonable demands. I still remember that evening clearly. It was a Saturday night, and I went to my parents' house for dinner. This was a tradition I had kept for years. No matter how busy I was, I always tried to be present at family dinners. I sensed something was off when I stepped into the house that night. I saw my mom and dad sitting stiffly on the couch, and David stood in the corner of the room looking anxious. My heart started racing like something bad was about to happen. As soon as I sat down, my dad looked me straight in the eye and said, "Nolan, I need to talk to you about David." The second I heard that, my whole body tensed up. Every time they started a conversation that way, I knew they were about to ask me for something involving my younger brother. Trying to stay calm, I replied, "What is it, Dad?" And then, with a serious tone, he said, "David just got divorced. He has to raise Alex on his own now. He needs a house so they can have a stable place to live." At first, I nodded, thinking they would ask for advice on finding a good rental. But then, my dad said something that hit me like a slap. "David is looking at a house that costs $350,000. I think you should buy it for him." At that moment, I felt like someone had just hit me. It was not because of the money but because they said it was my obligation. Holding myself together, I asked, "Why should I buy a house for David?" Instead of giving a reasonable answer, my mom jumped in, pleading, "David's had it rough, honey. He's just gone through a divorce, and now he has to take care of his little boy. You're his big brother in a better financial position, and you're not married or raising kids, so it makes sense for you to help." Then, with a hopeful look, David added, "Nolan, I'll pay you back. I promise I'll pay you within 10 years. Hearing that, I couldn't help but laugh. Paying back $350,000 in 10 years would mean he'd have to give me almost $3,000 monthly. But he only makes around $2,500 a month. After that, I calmly but firmly said, "I can't buy a house for David." The second those words came out of my mouth, the room went completely still. My dad gave me a look I had never seen before, a mix of anger and disappointment. With a cold tone, he asked, "Why not?" Trying to explain reasonably, I said, "Dad, $350,000 is a lot of money, and David is 30 years old. He can take care of himself." But as soon as I said that, my dad jumped to his feet, his face red with rage. He shouted, "Don't lecture me. Do you not see your brother has to raise Alex? You're selfish. You have money and won't help your brother." At that moment, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. This wasn't the father I had always looked up to. Still, I tried to keep my cool and said, "I'm not being selfish. I've already supported this family in many ways, but buying a house is too much. David can rent something smaller that fits his life and income." After I said that, my dad growled and asked, "So, will you help your brother?" By then, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I answered firmly, "No." The moment that word left my mouth, my dad shot back with the most brutal thing I've ever heard in my life. "Get out. You're not my child." Right then, it felt like the whole world froze. I looked at my mom, hoping she would say something, but she just turned her face away. David stood there silently, not saying a word to defend me. That was the exact moment I knew I had been completely cut off from my family. About 2 minutes later, I left my parents' house without saying another word. On the drive home, I felt this strange emptiness spreading through my chest. It wasn't anger, it wasn't sadness, it was complete numbness. Sitting in the car, watching the streetlights blur past, I asked myself, why am I the one being cast out after everything I've done for them over the years? For almost 2 years straight, $1,200 a month, never once late. Not to mention all the extra help whenever the family needed something urgent. But all that disappeared in a single sentence. "You're not my child." When I got home, I sat in the darkness of my living room. I realized something I had tried to deny for years in that silence. That night wasn't the first time I had been mistreated in my family. Ever since I was a kid, I have been expected to take on the responsibility, while David was the one who got to be coddled and protected. I remember being 8 years old and David was 6. Every evening after dinner, while David was allowed to watch TV or play with his toys, I had to help Mom with the dishes. When I asked why David didn't have to help, Mom would always say softly, "He's still little, honey. Let him play." But the answer stayed the same even when David turned 10, 12, or 15. My little brother was always too young to have any responsibility, and I was always old enough to carry the load. I remember one time when David was 14. He broke the neighbor's window playing baseball. Instead of making him own up to it and apologize, my parents told me to apologize on his behalf. I was 16 at the time. Frustrated, I asked them, "Why should I take responsibility for what David did?" And sternly, my dad replied, "Because you're his older brother. You're supposed to help him." At that moment, even at just 16, I understood that I would always be expected to sacrifice for my family. I was born 2 years before David, not because I did something wrong. That favoritism played out over and over throughout my childhood. Every time David messed up, I had to clean it up. Whenever David wanted something, I was expected to give it up. And every time I pushed back, the answer was always the same. "You're the older brother. You have to give in to your little brother." After all that, I only looked forward to turning 18 and finally walking away from that family. When I turned 18 and received my college acceptance letter, that was the moment I truly understood that in my family, I would always have to take care of myself. I remember that afternoon so clearly. I was holding the acceptance letter in my hands, along with news of a partial scholarship. My heart was racing with excitement, not just because I got into my dream school, but because the scholarship would ease the financial burden. When I got home, I rushed to find my parents to share the good news. They sat in the living room, Dad reading the newspaper and Mom watching TV. Excitedly, I told them, "Mom, Dad, I got into college, and I got a partial scholarship." After I said that, Dad put the newspaper down and looked at me seriously. Mom turned off the TV and faced me. In that moment of silence, I felt a heaviness I had never experienced while sharing something joyful. With a flat, emotionless tone, Dad said, "Congratulations, but you know our financial situation isn't easy right now." Hearing that made my chest tighten. Trying to stay calm, I asked, "What do you mean?" And then, with a voice that was honest but cold, Mom said, "Nolan, with the way things are right now, we can't help you with living expenses or the rest of the costs." When she finished speaking, it felt like someone had dropped a heavy stone on my chest. It wasn't because I couldn't handle things on my own. It was how they said it, like it was just a simple fact and not something worth discussing. At that point, I nodded and said, "I understand. I'll manage. A lot of students work part-time or take out loans. It'll be fine." When those words left my mouth, I saw relief wash over their faces. It was as if they had been worried I would react badly or ask for something. Then Dad smiled and said, "You're a good kid. I know you'll be just fine." That night, lying in the bedroom I had lived in for 18 years, I made a big decision. I would move into the campus dorms as soon as the first semester started. I didn't want to be home anymore, where I'd have to watch my parents continue favoring David daily. I completed my dorm application the following week and got a part-time job on campus. When I told my parents I was moving out, they nodded and said, "That's good. You'll learn how to be independent." No one asked if I was sure. No one said they'd miss me. No one expressed any concern about whether I could handle it. For the next 4 years in college, I balanced studying and working. I worked as a teaching assistant, served food in the cafeteria, worked in the library, and even took a weekend delivery job. Between student loans and part-time wages, I managed to cover tuition and living costs. But the most challenging part wasn't the financial pressure. What hurt the most was my parents' complete indifference to my life. I still went home on weekends for Christmas, Thanksgiving, and their birthdays. But in all those 4 years, not once did they ask, "Are you doing okay?" Or "Do you need anything?" They would nod when they saw me, ask a few polite questions like, "How's school going?" and then shift their attention to David. Every time, I just tried to get through the dinner as quickly as possible, then caught the bus back to my dorm. During those 4 years, after graduating college with honors, I was fortunate enough to land my first job with a starting salary of $55,000 a year after taxes. For some people, that might not seem like a high salary, but for me, someone who had spent 4 years living frugally, it was a real opportunity to start building a future. From my first month at work, I set a clear goal: to save and buy a small home. I knew that might sound overly ambitious, but I had always longed for a place that truly belonged to me. My plan at the time was strict but straightforward. Each month, after covering all my essential expenses like rent, food, gas, and insurance, I put at least $400 into a savings account and set aside another $400 to invest in the stock market. That meant I had to live on less than $2,500 a month for everything else. My lifestyle back then was effortless. I cooked at home for almost every dinner and only ate out on special occasions. Most of my clothes came from discount stores or outlet malls. My entertainment was borrowing books from the public library and watching movies at home. Many coworkers around my age often invited me to go to bars on the weekends, take short trips, or buy the latest tech gadgets. When I turned them down because I was saving, they would joke and say, "Nolan, you live like a 60-year-old man." But I didn't care about those comments. Whenever I looked at my growing savings balance, I felt joy and pride that no luxury item could ever give me. After 1 year on the job, thanks to good performance, I got promoted and received a raise of $75,000 a year. Instead of upgrading my lifestyle, I kept living the same way and increased my monthly savings and investment to $2,000. 3 years into my career, I moved to a larger company with a salary of $105,000 a year. Then, at the start of my 4th year after graduation, one of the stocks I had invested in increased tenfold in value. That was when I reached $350,000 in savings at 27. Soon after, I decided to buy a home for myself. I still remember signing the contract for my 2-bedroom house in Lubbock for $220,000. That day, sitting in the empty living room of my new home, I felt a sense of pride I had never experienced before. But that pride wasn't shared by my parents. I didn't receive much praise when I invited them over to see the house. No one said, "You did great." No one asked, "Do you need any help?" Their only reaction was one sentence: "This house is too small. How are your parents and David supposed to live here with you in the future?" After hearing that, I didn't argue. I just smiled and let it go. From that moment on, I also knew I shouldn't share any more of my happiness with my family. My life was finally settling down when, 2 months later, I received the first request from my parents. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I was deep in work when my mom called. When I picked up the phone, she forcefully said, "Nolan, I have some good news for you." Then, with an excited voice as if announcing something significant, she said, "David is getting married. Emily is pregnant, so they've decided to proceed with the wedding." I stayed silent for a moment, trying to process the news. David and Emily had only known each other for 6 months, and now they were expecting a child. Trying to stay calm, I replied, "Is that so? Tell David congratulations for me." But right after that, my mom continued with the tone I had grown all too familiar with, which always preceded an unreasonable request. She said that David needed around $15,000 for the wedding, and my parents didn't have the money. I still remember her exact words. She said, "We don't have enough, so can you help David with that? He'll help you when it's your turn to get married." Hearing that, I felt the blood rush to my head. It wasn't just that $15,000 was a lot of money. What frustrated me even more was how they asked for it, as if it was simply my obligation. Trying to stay calm, I asked her, "Don't David and Emily have any savings?" With a familiar excuse, she replied, "They're still young. They haven't had the chance to save much. And now, with Emily pregnant, they'll need to focus on the baby." After hearing that, I said bluntly, "If they don't have the money, they should scale the wedding down. Just invite close family." Immediately, my mom said, "A wedding only happens once. You're the older brother, and you're in a better position. You have to help him this time." At that moment, I thought about the $15,000. After buying my house, I still had over $100,000 left in savings. Honestly, I couldn't afford to give him that amount, but I didn't want to. I wasn't responsible for his decisions, and I had a feeling this wouldn't be the last time they came to me with something like this. After a short pause, I decided to offer something reasonable. I told my mom, "I'll give him $3,000 as a wedding gift. The rest is up to David and Emily to figure out." The moment I said it, I heard a disappointed sigh on the other end. In a sad tone, she said, "3,000 isn't enough. They need at least 15 to have a proper wedding." But this time I stood firm. With a steady voice, I told her, $3,000 is all I'm willing to give. If that's not enough, I won't give anything. The moment those words came out, the tension in the conversation spiked. My mom went quiet for a few seconds, then said with evident disappointment, "You're so selfish." And before I could respond, she hung up. I sat there, staring at my phone, feeling a slow-burning anger rise inside me. Once again, I was labeled selfish because I refused to pay for someone else's choices. Time went on. David and Emily had their wedding and welcomed their son, Alex. My life continued to stay steady with my job and my little house. I thought everything would remain peaceful until another phone call from my mom changed everything. It was a weekend evening about 2 years ago. After a few polite questions during the call, my mom complained in a tired voice. She talked about the rising rent and how their retirement income wasn't enough to cover all their expenses. At that moment, I already knew where the conversation was heading. Trying to sound concerned, I asked, "How much are you and Dad paying each month now?" And then, with genuine worry in her voice, she answered, $1,200 a month. In 2 months, the lease ends, and the landlord just told us the new contract will be $1,400. Hearing that number, I understood the financial pressure they were under. With their limited retirement income, paying $1,400 monthly for rent would be a real burden. Trying to show empathy, I said, "So, do you and Dad have a plan yet?" There was a brief silence, and I sensed hesitation on her end. Then, carefully, she said, "I was thinking, maybe your father and I could move in with you for a while?" After hearing that, I went completely quiet. My house only had 2 bedrooms, one of which was my home office. If my parents moved in, I would lose all my personal space. But more than that, I knew if they moved in, I'd be responsible for everything: groceries, utilities, daily expenses. And chances were, David would come by often to visit with Alex. After some thought, I decided to offer a different solution. I told her, "Mom, instead of moving in with me, I can help you cover monthly rent." The moment I said that, her voice lit up. "Really? How much can you help with?" I quickly did the math and came up with a number. "I can cover $1,000 each month. That way, you and Dad only need to pay $400. But as soon as I finished saying that, she started pleading again. "Could you help a little more?" After a short pause, I decided to make one final compromise. I told her, "All right, Mom, I'll cover $1,200 monthly. You and Dad will only need to pay $200. That's the maximum I can help with. I'll transfer it to you at the start of every month." At that moment, I thought I was doing the right thing, supporting my parents during a tough time while protecting my living space. But I had no idea that this decision would be the beginning of even bigger requests in the future. But in the middle of all the tension and conflict with my family, there was one person I could never stay mad at: my nephew, Alex. At the time, he was 3 years old, with big round eyes just like David's when he was a kid, but with a bright, innocent smile that my brother had long since lost. I remember the first time I held Alex right after he was born. A natural warmth and protective instinct filled me when I cradled him. I softly whispered to him, "Hi there, I'm Uncle Nolan." Even though David and Emily were often careless regarding parenting, I always tried to be the best uncle I could be. Every month, I picked Alex up from preschool and took him out for ice cream or to the park. During those moments, when I saw his bright smile, I could forget about all the stress and drama with the adults in the family. Alex's birthday has always been a special occasion for me. Last year, when he turned 2, I bought him a little red bicycle. When he saw it, he ran over and hugged my leg tightly, saying in his tiny voice, "Thank you, Uncle Nolan." My heart melted right then and there. At that moment, I understood something important. No matter how angry I might be with the adults, I couldn't let those feelings affect my bond with Alex. He wasn't at fault for the conflicts between the grown-ups. Even when I felt most disheartened with my family, just thinking about Alex always brought out something emotional in me. I wanted to be a good role model for him. I wanted him to know that we can care for and support each other without expecting anything in return. Later on, when David and Emily divorced, I became especially worried for Alex. A 3-year-old child can't understand why his parents no longer live together. In my visits with him after that, I always tried to create joyful moments to help him forget about his mom's absence. With genuine care, I often asked him, "Did you have fun today?" And with his innocent smile, he would always answer, "I had so much fun, Uncle. Do you have candy?" Simple questions like that made me realize that happiness doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes all it takes is one adult who cares and listens. A child can feel loved. That's why, even later on, after I chose to cut ties with my parents and David, I continued to send gifts to Alex on every special occasion. Not because I wanted to prove anything, but simply because I loved that little boy and wanted him to know that Uncle Nolan always thinks about him. Back to that night, after returning from the dinner that changed everything, I sat in my small home office. After spending a long time reflecting, I sent a message to my parents and David in our family group chat. The message read, "Dear Dad, Mom, and David, after what happened tonight, I've thought deeply about our relationship. Starting tomorrow, I will stop providing the monthly financial support of $1,200 to Mom and Dad. I've supported the family for 2 years without missing a single payment. But tonight, when I refused to buy a house for David, I was told I'm not a son anymore. That made it clear to me that the love in this family is conditional, and it only exists when I meet financial expectations. I can no longer be the unconditional sponsor of other people's decisions. David is 30 years old, has a child, and is a grown man. He needs to learn how to take responsibility for his own life. This decision is final and cannot be changed." After sending that message, I sat in silence. The first feeling wasn't relief but a deep sadness because I had just officially cut the last thread that tied me to my family. But right after that, another feeling rose within me, a sense of freedom. About 10 minutes later, my phone started ringing repeatedly with calls from Mom, Dad, and David. I didn't answer any of them. The next morning, as I read over my message, I felt no regret about my decision. Every word reflected exactly how I felt. I hadn't written it out of anger, but from a clear understanding of my self-worth and personal boundaries. After sending that message, I thought they would need some time to reflect and maybe reach out to me more calmly. But I was wrong. 3 days after I sent the message, they showed up at my house without warning. When I opened the door, my parents and David pushed inside without waiting to be invited. My father's face was red with anger, while my mother looked worried and exhausted. David stood behind them, visibly annoyed. Before I could say anything, my father shouted, "You think cutting the money off is going to do anything?" Trying to stay calm in the face of his aggression, I replied, "Dad, can we sit down and talk this through?" But instead of listening, he continued yelling, "There's nothing to talk about. If you don't buy him a house, you'll rent one for David and Alex, and on top of that, send Alex another $500 a month." I stood frozen in place. They did not expect me to continue paying $1,200 monthly but wanted me to cover housing for David, too. With a firm tone, I said, "I've made my decision. I can't support this anymore." Right then, David snapped, "You have a house and a high-paying job, and you won't help your brother and nephew? You're selfish." At that moment, I felt the blood rush to my head. They had barged into my home without permission and now made outrageous demands. I replied more firmly, "I've helped this family enough. It's time I focus on my own life." As soon as those words came out, my mom began to cry and pleaded, "Nolan, your father and I are getting old. We can't earn like we used to. You can't abandon your family." Seeing her cry softened me for a second. I opened my mouth to say something comforting, but before speaking, my father raised his voice again. "You owe this family. You only got an education and a good job because we raised you." His shouting echoed through the house. I was sure the neighbors could hear it. Embarrassed and angry, I said, "You must leave my house, now." Instead of leaving, David stepped closer and pointed a finger in my face, saying, "You can't kick us out. This is your family." Then my father said with venom, "I don't have a son as ungrateful as you." By that point, the noise had drawn attention. I glanced out the window and saw neighbors watching from a distance. Realizing things were spiraling out of control, I did something I never thought I would do to my family. With shaking hands, I took out my phone and dialed 911. When the line connected, I spoke seriously, "I need police assistance. There are people in my house refusing to leave." When I said that, all three fell silent and looked at me in shock. They probably never imagined I would call the police on my own family. 15 minutes later, 2 officers arrived at my house. I explained the situation, and they asked my parents and David to leave. In front of the officers, they had no choice but to go. Before leaving, my father looked at me with disappointment in his eyes and said one final thing. "To me, you're already dead." At that moment, watching them get in the car and drive away under the eyes of the neighbors and the police, I felt like I had just closed the door on a significant chapter of my life. I thought that after the incident with the police, my family would finally understand how serious I was about my decision. But instead of reflecting on their actions, they chose a path I never expected. They turned me into the villain in the eyes of our extended family. They went around spreading lies about me to everyone they knew. And after hearing their version of events, people started contacting me. The first call came from Aunt Margaret, my mother's older sister, someone I had always respected deeply. It was a Monday evening. When my phone rang, I had just gotten home after a long, stressful day at work. When I picked up, she spoke in a cold voice I had never heard. "Nolan, I'm very disappointed in you." Confused, I asked, "What do you mean, Aunt Margaret? What's going on?" With an accusatory tone, she continued, "Your mother called and told me everything. You kicked your elderly parents out of your house and even called the police on them. Do you even realize what you're doing?" Her words felt like a slap across the face. My mom had provided an entirely different version of what had happened. Trying to explain, I said, "That's not what happened. Let me explain." But before I could finish, she cut me off. "There's nothing to explain. Your parents raised you and gave you everything. Now you've made it in life and you abandon them? I'm ashamed of you." Right after that, she hung up. No chance to defend myself. No opportunity to be heard. That entire week, I was flooded with calls and messages from other relatives. Uncle Robert, my dad's younger brother, sent me a long message. "Nolan, I didn't expect this from you. Your parents sacrificed their whole lives for their children. Now that they're old and need care, you turn your back on them." Reading that message made me feel like the whole world had turned against me. People I had once loved and respected now saw me as some ungrateful monster. At that moment, I realized my parents had built an entirely different story about me. In their version, I was the ungrateful son with money, refusing to help his poor parents and his struggling younger brother raising a child alone. But after everything, I was too exhausted to keep defending myself. I decided to buy a new phone number to cut all contact completely. At the same time, I began planning to purchase a new house in case my relatives or parents continued showing up and causing trouble. 3 months after cutting ties with my family, my life had finally settled again. I had more time and money to focus on myself, develop personal interests, and even started dating a woman named Sarah, whom I met through friends. One Saturday afternoon about a month ago, I was working in my front yard when I heard the doorbell ring. Looking out the window, I saw my mom and dad standing at the door. This time, they didn't look angry or aggressive. They looked tired and much older. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. Standing in the doorway, I asked cautiously, "What brings you here?" As soon as she saw me, my mom began to cry. With a trembling voice, she said, "We came to apologize." Hearing that stirred a complex mix of emotions inside me. Part of me had been waiting for this moment for months, but another part remained cautious about their true intentions. With a choked voice, my father added, "I was wrong to say you weren't my son. I'm old and quick-tempered. Now I understand how much you've been through." Then my mother pleaded, "Nolan, I know I favored David too much. I thought he needed more care because he was younger. I didn't realize how much that hurt you." At that moment, they seemed genuinely remorseful. It didn't feel like a trick or manipulation. It felt like a sincere admission from two people who had finally recognized their mistakes. Trying to control my emotions, I asked, "Why now? Why are you saying this only today?" With a genuine tone, my father replied, "Because we already lost you. And now we see that nothing matters more than family." Mom nodded and continued, "These past few months without your laughter or visits, I finally understood what I had lost." Hearing those words moved something in me. For the first time, I listened to my parents admit they were wrong and show they valued me. Then my mom asked with hope, "Can you forgive us? Can we go back to how things were?" At that moment, I understood what that question meant. They didn't just want forgiveness. They wanted everything to return to how it had been, including the financial support of $1,200 a month. Carefully, I asked, "What do you mean by how things were?" Then my father, looking slightly embarrassed, said, "I mean, could you support us again like before? We're struggling." When those words left his mouth, it felt like a cold bucket of water had been poured over me. That's when I realized they hadn't come only to apologize. They had also come to ask for money. No matter how sincere the words sounded, the ultimate goal was still financial. After a long pause, I looked them in the eyes and said, "I forgive you. I don't hold any hatred in my heart. their faces lit up with hope. But I continued, "But I can't go back to how things were." At that moment, their expressions shifted from hope to disappointment. In a pleading voice, my mom asked, "Why?" "We apologize." After her question, I explained, "Because I forgive, but I don't forget." What happened showed me exactly where I stood in this family. I only had value when I could offer money. Then, with a firm tone, I said, "I will always love you, but I can no longer be the child who carries the weight for everyone else." After I said that, they stood there silently for a long while. Maybe they had hoped that an apology would be enough to reset everything. Finally, in a voice full of sadness, my father said, "So that's your decision." And then they turned and walked away, this time with no anger, blame, sorrow, or acceptance. Watching them leave, I felt a deep sadness, but also a sense of relief. I had done the right thing. I had forgiven, but I hadn't returned. I had learned to love from a distance without letting myself be hurt again. Today, my life is more stable and happier than ever. Sarah and I have an excellent relationship built on respect and mutual understanding. I now have the time and financial freedom to pursue personal interests I couldn't afford. Most importantly, I've learned that saying no doesn't mean I don't love. Setting boundaries doesn't mean I'm selfish. And refusing unreasonable demands doesn't mean I'm ungrateful. Even though I've cut ties with everyone else, I've kept a good relationship with Alex, David's son. I still send him gifts on special occasions. I hope he grows up knowing that at least one person in his family understands the meaning of unconditional love. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone out there who might be in a similar situation find the strength to make the right choices for themselves. And before I end this story, I want to ask you, was I wrong for refusing to help my family? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear what you think. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this story. Thank you, and see you again at the next one. At the Christmas party at my aunt's house 1 year ago, my uncle asked me about my job. His voice came out laced with sarcasm as he said, "So, Miles? Still working at that coffee shop?" After that question, I answered with complete confidence. Yes, I still am. But as the co-founder of 21 coffee shops operating across 5 states. And after I said that, no one believed me. They thought I was making it up just because someone had seen a photo of me wearing a server uniform from the shop at some point. And to make it worse, my father, Caleb, publicly called me a disgrace right there in the middle of the party just because he believed I had made up something too outrageous. So what decisions did I make after that? Keep listening. This is my story. Hi everyone, my name is Miles. I'm 32 years old and live in a quiet neighborhood in Portland, Oregon. My best friend Brian and I currently own 21 coffee shops across 5 states. We started this journey 5 years ago with a small rental space and used nothing but our savings. No loans, no help from family. Even though I now have a stable job, a good income, and a house worth nearly $600,000, I still choose to live quietly. Unlike many people, I avoid talking about my accomplishments. That decision traces back to something that happened 7 years ago. Back then, in a moment of pride, I tried too hard to prove myself and said too much at the wrong time. My father and younger brother were the ones who made me pay the price for it. Since that day, I promised myself that no matter how far I went or how much success I achieved, I would never brag about what I had, especially in front of my family. But last Christmas, I broke that promise. I slipped and said one line that seemed harmless at the time. But that was all they needed. The very people who once looked down on me finally had a chance to tear me down right in front of everyone. In early December last year, when the Christmas spirit had just settled into every street corner, I got a phone call from Aunt Lauren. I hadn't heard her voice in 7 years. After a few cautious pleasantries, she asked if I could come home with the whole family for this year's Christmas party. I stayed silent for a long time at that moment, about to say no like I had so many times before. But before I could get a word out, she gently added, "Everyone misses you." I didn't answer right away, but that night I couldn't sleep. I wasn't sure if they really missed me or if they just missed the old version of me, the one who used to be vulnerable. Maybe it was curiosity. Perhaps part of me still wanted to believe in something good. Either way, I decided to go back. On Christmas Day, after nearly 2 hours from Portland to Salem, I pulled up in front of her house as the clock struck 11 a.m. While I was trying to find a parking spot, a familiar voice called out from behind me on the right, loud enough for the whole yard to hear. 7 years? And you're still driving that thing? Looks like nothing's changed. I turned around. It was Peter, my cousin. He was leaning against a brand new SUV with his arms crossed, wearing a look that was part mocking, part satisfied. I looked at him for a few seconds, exhaled quietly through my nose, and smiled instead of saying anything. I didn't want to let Peter get to me. I didn't come back here to argue with anyone. After I parked the car, I grabbed the gift bag I had prepared the night before. Inside were a few bottles of wine. It's not expensive, but classy enough to show respect. As soon as I stepped into the living room, I saw 2 people I hadn't seen in 7 years. My dad and my younger brother. They stood in the corner of the room, close to the big Christmas tree by the wall. Their eyes landed on me for only 3 seconds before quickly turning away. I didn't walk over to them. Instead, I nodded at the nearby relatives, answered a few polite questions about work and health, and kept my smile just enough to be respectful. A moment later, Aunt Lauren came out of the kitchen. When she saw me, she took off her oven mitts, rushed toward me, and hugged me tightly. Her voice trembled, but there was a strange warmth in it. Welcome home. At that moment, I thought maybe this time would be different. Perhaps today would be the day I could finally feel like I belonged here, even just once after 7 years away. But I didn't know that this very day would begin another collapse, this time right in front of everyone. About 15 minutes after I arrived, the party officially began. I sat at the end of the table next to a few younger cousins. Looking around, I figured it had been long since my family had gathered in such a big group. On the table were all the classic holiday dishes: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, buttered rolls, cream soup, and several trays of homemade desserts. I glanced at how everything was arranged, noticed the hot dishes were still steaming, and knew immediately that Aunt Lauren must have spent the whole morning preparing it all. Aunt Lauren is my mother's younger sister. Back when Mom was still alive, she used to stop by our house often, always bringing sweet pastries and bags of sun-warmed fruit from her backyard. But after Mom passed away nearly 10 years ago, Aunt Lauren rarely came around anymore. And the reason she stopped visiting was my father. I still remember the few rare times she came by after the funeral. My dad didn't bother hiding his irritation. He would start scowling when he opened the door and make offhand remarks about how we didn't need anyone's pity. Once, while my brother and I were laughing and chatting with her, he suddenly stood up and roared, "If that's the kind of visit this is, don't bother. I can take care of my kids." After moments like that, I never saw her come back again. Back to that day's party. About 30 minutes into the meal, just as laughter began rising from the far end of the table, Uncle Andrew, Peter's father, suddenly turned to me. His voice cut clearly through the noise in the room. "So, Miles, still working at the coffee shop?" At that moment, the room seemed to pause. Almost everyone turned to look at me. I could feel them waiting for an answer. Uncle Andrew asked that question because he had a short business trip to Portland 3 years earlier. By coincidence, he walked into one of my coffee shops. 2 employees had called in sick with the flu that day, and the shop was packed. So I wore the uniform and stepped in to help, just like any regular barista. When he walked in and saw me behind the counter in uniform, he froze for just a moment. I saw the surprise in his eyes, but he didn't say anything. I didn't explain. I nodded at him like I would to any customer, then carried a coffee over to the corner table. I never thought he'd mention it again. But a few days later, the messages started coming. Sarcastic texts. Some even included laughing emojis and a photo of me in uniform. I didn't take long to figure out where it all started. One night, I got a message from my father. No build-up. Just one sentence. "You embarrassed me." I didn't reply. At that point, my father and I had long lost connection. 3 years later, right in the middle of a Christmas party, Uncle Andrew brought it up again, using that moment to take a jab. His tone was steady, but his eyes gave away the mockery. I sat still, my hand resting on the spoon, thinking I'd just let it pass like I always did. But something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the sideways glance from my father across the table. Perhaps it was the faint laugh I heard from a relative nearby. Right then, I lifted my head, looked straight at Uncle Andrew, and calmly said, "Yes, I still do. But now, as the co-founder of 21 coffee shops operating in 5 states. After I said that, the table fell quiet. Even the clinking of silverware stopped. I noticed a few people exchanging glances. Some just stared at me. Then suddenly Peter, Uncle Andrew's son, burst out laughing. He leaned back in his chair, shaking his head, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Oh man, listen to this guy. It sounds like one of those TikTok bros talking about their $1 million startup." That was some wild fiction. A few others chuckled. One of my aunts to the left nodded and said just loud enough, "Yeah. Founder, but still serving tables? Something about that doesn't add up." Someone else chimed in, "Exactly. Anyone can say that. I could also call myself the owner of a 5-star restaurant if all it took were talk." The laughter started spreading around the table. Glances, nods, quiet snickers with no effort to hide them. At that moment, I looked around the room and felt like I had just turned myself into a joke in the middle of a circus, with my family as the audience. But strangely, I didn't feel ashamed. The only thing I noticed was my father's eyes. He wasn't laughing. He didn't speak. He just stared at the wine glass in front of him as if he had just heard something he hadn't fully processed yet. About a minute after I finished speaking, as the last bits of laughter finally faded, the space around the dinner table fell into a kind of silence that didn't have a name. It felt like everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. I just sat there, my hand resting lightly on the edge of the chair. No strong emotion left inside me. And then, just as I expected, my father spoke. His voice was slow, low, and tightly restrained. "You're embarrassing me. Who do you think you are, saying you own 21 coffee shops? Would you still drive that old car if you were that successful?" Right after those words, I turned to look at him. His face was flushed red, and his eyes locked onto me with nothing held back. The tension at the table was so thick it felt frozen in the air. A few seconds later, my younger brother, Brody, spoke up from across the table. His voice was louder this time, sharper. "You're always like this, always trying so hard to stand out. Working in a coffee shop, being caught in uniform, and still acting like you're special." After hearing all that, I didn't say a word. I just raised one eyebrow slightly and took a slow, deep breath. I heard my father's wine glass slam hard against the table. The sound was loud enough to pull everyone's attention back. And the next moment, he stood up, glaring at me like he'd just discovered something disgusting in his house. He shouted, "Get out of here, and don't ever show your face to this family again. You reeking disgrace." That was when I knew I had no reason to stay. Not because I was hurt, but because I finally saw it clearly. The people who once called me family had only been waiting for a chance to push me out again. This time, they did it openly, without mercy. Just as I quietly slid my chair back to stand up, a voice rang out from the head of the table, clear and firm. "That's enough, Caleb. The one who should leave this party is you, not Miles. You need to remember this is my house. You're a guest, and you don't have the right to kick anyone out of my home." The entire room froze. No one expected the voice to come from Aunt Lauren. Her tone wasn't loud but sharp enough to make the whole table hold its breath for a few seconds. She looked at my father, her eyes free of the usual softness. She wasn't angry, but how she stood up, kept her back straight, and delivered every word made the room feel heavier than any raised voice could. Then she turned to Uncle Andrew. Her voice stayed calm, but she didn't hold back this time. "Andrew, I hope this is the last time you mock someone in my house. The same goes for Peter. Teach your son some respect." Peter stared down at the table while Uncle Andrew muttered under his breath, I'm sorry, Lauren." His apology was so quiet that only the people closest could hear it. I wasn't surprised by Aunt Lauren's words. I had long known she saw everything. She just chose not to interfere. But today she stood up for me, right there at the table in front of all the people who, for years, had made me feel like nothing more than an outsider. She turned back to me, her eyes softened, and her voice lowered, steady but warm. "Stay, Miles. As long as I'm here, no one will push you around." At that moment, I could feel the protection in her voice. I nodded slightly, looked at her and said, "Thank you, Auntie, but I have something at the shop I need to take care of." That line was just an excuse to leave, and I knew she understood. But instead of trying to stop me with words, she just let out a soft sigh and said, "Then wait a moment for me." About 10 minutes later, as I zipped up my coat and stepped onto the front porch, she returned with a carefully packed bag of food. She placed it into my hands, looked at me and said nothing. At that moment, I felt a sting rise at the bridge of my nose. Not out of sadness and not exactly out of gratitude either. It was the quiet ache of realizing that after all these years, someone in my family still cared enough not to let me walk away empty-handed. About 2 hours later, I arrived at one of our familiar locations in Portland. Everything was as it always was. The sound of grinders humming, the scent of freshly brewed coffee hanging in the air, and soft jazz floating from the ceiling speakers. A few staff members behind the counter gave me a quick nod as I walked in. I returned it with a slight nod and the same familiar smile I'd given every day for 5 years, even on the worst days. When I made my way to the bar, Luca, who was on the machine then, immediately stepped aside without a word. He didn't need me to say anything. Like every other barista in our stores, Luca knew that I always liked to make my coffee, especially at the end of the day or after something that left my mind running. About 10 minutes later, I brought my cup to my usual spot by the window. It was private enough but still close enough to observe the entire cafe. I sat down, set the cup on the table, and leaned back into the chair like I had returned to the safest place I knew. After the first few sips, the soft bitterness and hint of acidity from the beans began to bring my body back to life. My mind started to clear, but as my eyes wandered through the large glass window, I suddenly realized I remembered what happened 7 years ago. Not because I wanted to, but after what happened this afternoon, that memory felt like it had been pulled back into the present. Sharp, vivid, and still carrying that familiar sting somewhere deep in my chest. 7 years ago, on a weekend afternoon, I had just gotten home from work when I saw my father sitting in the living room with a newspaper, barely past the second page. He called me over and said he had something to discuss. His tone was calm, like he was about to talk about something completely ordinary. I pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. My younger brother was there too, sitting at the corner of the table, headphones on, but I saw him glance over when our dad started speaking. My father looked me straight in the eyes and said, "I'm planning to leave this house to your brother. He needs a stable place to start after graduation." I sat still for a few seconds. The sentence was short, but it hit me in a way I couldn't explain. I asked him again, my voice low but clear, "What about me?" He didn't look at me when he answered and didn't hesitate. "You already have a job. You make good money. You can take care of yourself. Your brother might not land a decent job after school like you did." At that moment, I gently clasped my hands on my lap to stay calm. Then I said, "Do you remember who's been covering most of his senior year tuition? A guy who's only been working for a little over a year, sending money back every month like clockwork on the 15th. No one responded. My brother still had his headphones on, but he had obviously paused the music long ago. I looked straight at him and asked, "You don't have anything to say?" He didn't look back, just replied briefly, "This is Dad's decision. I'm not getting involved." I nodded slowly, not saying anything more. That night, I packed my things and moved out. No arguments. No one asked me to stay. Everything happened in this strange, quiet way, like they had been waiting for me to leave. And from that day until now, I haven't gone back. 7 years ago, my mistake was telling them how much I made. I had just graduated and landed a job at a finance company. My income wasn't less than $70,000 a year after taxes, and I bragged about it to my father. After that, I learned to live. I stopped showing off to anyone and kept my income to myself. After the day my father announced he would leave the house to Brody, I didn't say another word. That night, I packed my things, called a ride, and went with nothing but the old backpack I had used in college. No one saw me off, no one named after me. I rented a small apartment on the outskirts of Portland, more than a 30-minute drive from work. It wasn't spacious or fancy, but it was clean and quiet enough for me to start over. At the time, I wasn't earning a small salary. Working in finance, I made over $70,000 yearly after taxes. That was more than enough to live comfortably if I wanted. But when I left home, I chose to live modestly. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to feel what it meant to be fully in control again. I wanted to know exactly where every dollar went and prove I could stand alone without leaning on anyone. I cooked my meals, set a clear budget, and saved a fixed monthly amount. Not to buy a house, not to get a new car. I just wanted a cushion that, if I decided to start something of my own one day, I could. Then, 2 years later, on a Friday evening, Brian, my best friend from college, asked to meet at a small coffee shop. He brought a business plan draft with him and said he wanted to open an independent cafe. It's just a small space with real quality, not another cookie-cutter franchise. He asked if I wanted to start it with him. At first, I hesitated. But when I looked into Brian's eyes and saw how committed he was, I knew if I didn't leap, I might regret it for the rest of my life. After deciding to join him, I withdrew all the savings I had built over those 2 years, and we opened our first cafe. We named it Elm and Cedar. It sat on a quiet corner of Alberta Street in Portland. The early days were incredibly tough. We built our shelves, painted the walls ourselves, rented used machines, and took turns running the shop from morning to night. Some days it rained nonstop and we sold only 3 cups. Some days the espresso machine broke right at peak hour. We were sore all over at night but still had to go through the books, line by line, down to every receipt. Then the regulars started to show up. Some dropped by every Monday morning. Some claimed one corner of the cafe and never changed their order all year. A year later, we opened our second location in Beaverton, then Salem, then Seattle. Each city was a brand new lesson. We had to learn how to hire, manage, and protect the soul of the brand no matter where we were. And just like that, 5 years after leaving that tiny apartment and making one choice I never looked back on, we now own 21 coffee shops across 5 states. While I was sitting in my usual corner of the cafe, my mind drifting through the memories that had just resurfaced, my phone buzzed lightly. A notification from Instagram popped up and pulled me back to the present. I opened it out of habit, thinking I'd scroll past it and close the app, but a few new comments on a post from months ago made me pause. It was a photo of a coffee with a simple caption, "Slow morning." I hadn't thought much of it when I posted it, but now unfamiliar names left comments that I couldn't quite understand. Someone asked if I was still bragging about my coffee shop chain. Another mocked, "Still hand-making drinks with 21 stores? What a humble CEO." I read a few lines and went quiet. There was a strange tightness creeping into my chest. Just then, Luca, the barista on shift, walked up to me. He held his phone out gently and said with concern in his voice, "You should see this. I think you need to know." I took the phone right away. A newly posted video from a group called Family Drama was on the screen. The first image froze me. It was Aunt Lauren's living room during today's lunch party. The clip had been trimmed down. It only kept the part where I said I co-founded 21 coffee shops. Right after that came the wave of laughter, the mocking voices of my relatives, and my father yelling, "Get out of here, and don't ever show your face again, you reeking disgrace." Then I looked up at the title. It was bold and clear at the top of the post. "Miles Hart claims to own 21 coffee shops, gets kicked out for lying." As I scrolled down, the view count was climbing fast. So were the comments. Most came from people I'd never met, but they wrote as if they knew exactly who I was. I handed the phone back to Luca. At that moment, I didn't feel sad. I felt something all too familiar. When people don't know the whole story, they always believe the loudest part. And 20 minutes later, I had to shut down all my social media accounts. I wasn't interested in arguing with strangers who had too much time on their hands. At that point, I figured staying silent was my best decision. My phone rang right after locking down all my social media accounts. It was Brian. I had barely set my coffee cup down when his name lit up on the screen. I answered. His voice came through almost instantly, fast and urgent. "Did you hear about what people are saying about you?" I replied right away, my tone calm. "Yeah, I saw it." There was a pause on the other end. Then Brian spoke again, this time with apparent disbelief. "You saw it, and you're still this calm?" I took a slow breath, my eyes still focused on the window in front of me, and said, "What do you want me to do? Give it a few days. This will blow over." As soon as I said that, Brian's voice burst through again. With frustration he didn't bother to hide. "I swear, man, you drive me crazy sometimes." And before I could say anything else, he hung up. I didn't blame Brian. I knew exactly why he was upset. This wasn't the first time he had gotten angry at how quiet I could be and how I let things slide that he thought deserved a response. But I'm not like him. For me, not everything calls for a reaction. Sometimes silence is the only way I know how to protect whatever peace I have left. The next morning, while I was in the kitchen making breakfast, my phone buzzed softly on the counter. It was a message from Brian. I opened it right away. It was short, just like his usual texts, with only one line. "I took care of it for you." Right below was a link. It led straight to the Family Drama group, the same group that had spread the edited video of me the day before. I tapped the link. A new video had just been posted less than 20 minutes ago. Brian was the one in the video. He was sitting inside one of our coffee shops, with the brand's logo visible behind him. The video didn't have any fancy edits or effects. It was just a simple phone recording. But his voice was steady and direct. In the clip, he said, his name is Miles Hart. He co-founded a chain of 21 coffee shops currently operating in 5 states. This is the business license. These are photos of the stores we built together over the last 5 years. This is an interview we did that was published in a national coffee industry magazine last year. He held each paper up to the camera. Every image, every number, and every quote was laid out clearly. At the end of the video, Brian looked straight into the lens. His voice slowed down, and each word came through clear and firm. He doesn't owe anyone an explanation, but I think it's time people heard the truth. After watching the entire video, I sat and stared at the screen. Not because I was emotional, but because I knew Brian would never have made that video or posted it publicly unless he was furious on my behalf. Right after that, I sent him a message. Thank you for everything you did. After messaging Brian, I went back to the video. I scrolled through the comments below it. The post had already drawn thousands of views and shares in just 30 minutes. There were no loud laughs or mocking nicknames this time, like the day before. But that did not mean everyone was on my side. Some people spoke up for me and commented clearly and straightforwardly. Editing a video just to humiliate someone is one of the lowest things a family member can do. Another person wrote, I don't know this guy, but his friend showed paperwork and a published interview. That seems legit to me. Still, a few accounts raised doubts. Why stay silent yesterday and only come out with proof now? Feels a little too convenient. Someone else added, sure, the facts are there. But the way he talked at the party did feel a bit arrogant. Reading those comments, I was not surprised. I knew social media was not a place to settle truth and lies. It only shows one thing clearly. Who controls the story, then? In the days that followed, I went back to my usual routine. I still had the habit of dropping by one of our coffee shops unannounced, standing near the bar for a few minutes, asking a question or two, and then quietly leaving. I have done this for the past 5 years. Nothing had changed. I thought the storm had passed. But exactly 1 week later, it returned. This time, it came from the two people I least wanted to see. My father and brother. I still remember it clearly. It was a Tuesday around 9 in the morning. I was going over the payroll sheet when my phone rang. My father's name appeared on the screen. I did not hesitate. I hit decline immediately. Less than a minute later, a message came through. Your dad and Brody are waiting at the Portland store. If you don't show up, I'll keep coming back. I stared at the message. I was not surprised. But instead of avoiding them, I decided to go. Not to talk. To hear what they wanted. 30 minutes later, I arrived at the cafe. When I walked in, they were already seated in the back left corner, the most low-key spot in the shop. When they saw me, they stood up right away. Their faces were stiff and uneasy. The first thing my father said was, I'm sorry about the other day. Right after that, Brody nodded quickly and added, me too. I'm sorry. I looked straight at them and replied with one short line. Say what you came to say. I did not have to ask twice. Brody jumped in immediately. His voice was flat, without any emotion. We're still family. Can you give me and Dad 10% of the company? Or, if not that, maybe transfer one store to each of us. You know how it is. Dad's getting old, and my job doesn't pay well. I did not respond right away. 5 minutes passed before I finally looked up. I stared straight into their eyes and said just one thing. Go home, and wait to hear from my lawyer. As soon as those words left my mouth, I could see the change in their faces. My father leaned back in his chair. Brody looked at me with shock and what almost looked like relief. They thought I had agreed. They thought paperwork was coming their way. But they did not know that what they were about to receive would shock them more than anything they were expecting. Right after they left the coffee shop, I called Eric, the legal representative for the coffee chain Brian and I co-owned. I told him exactly what had just happened. No extra words, no detours. When I finished explaining, Eric's voice came steady and firm on the other end. Leave it to me. I know what to do. It'll be done in 2 days. I didn't ask anything else. I knew him well. When Eric said 2 days, he didn't mean 2.5. He meant not a minute late. And he was right. 2 days later, early in the morning, my phone rang again. It was Eric, this time with his usual report-style tone. The letter has been delivered as requested. The originals were handed directly to them, with full confirmation. I thanked him and said nothing more. But deep down, I already had a feeling about what would happen next. And I was right. That same afternoon, while I was in the office reviewing inventory reports, the phone rang again. This time, it was my father. I answered because I wanted to hear what his tone would be. When I picked up, his voice snapped through the line, sharp and angry. You bastard! Is this how you treat your father? I replied slowly and clearly, every word deliberate. I don't have a father. You've got the wrong person. And don't forget what my lawyer instructed. I didn't wait for his reaction. I hung up immediately. Then I opened my contacts and blocked his and Brody's numbers. I didn't do it out of anger. I did it because I understood exactly where his rage came from. It wasn't from pain. It was from disappointment. They had expected a transfer form, a share, a last-minute concession from me. But what they held in their hands was a legally binding no-contact order, accompanied by a formal cease and desist letter from Eric. The language was crystal clear. The legal team would begin litigation if they continued interfering or disrupting any part of the coffee chain's operations. And if that happened, even selling the house Brody held the title to wouldn't be enough to cover the damages. The days that followed were the first ones that truly felt peaceful. No more unknown calls early in the morning. No more tension every time my phone buzzed. No more cautious glances from people who once called me family. I went to work, stopped by the shops, sat in my usual corner with a cup of coffee just hot enough. And for the first time in years, I didn't have to worry about who might show up out of nowhere. Some would say I was being too harsh and should have been more forgiving and open. I should have let it go for the sake of family. But sometimes, forgiveness isn't about letting things slide. It's about knowing exactly when to stop. I didn't cut anyone off. I just stopped, leaving the door wide open. Not everyone who walks in deserves to stay. I also learned something through my mistakes. Don't rush to share your success, especially with people who don't ask out of care but out of calculation. Silence doesn't mean weakness. It's the best shield to protect the things that truly matter. It took me a long time to understand this. Peace doesn't come from having control over everything. It comes when you finally stop letting the wrong things into your life. And before I wrap up today's story, I want to leave you with a question. This one is for you, the listener who stayed with me until the last minute. If you were in my shoes, at that Christmas party in Aunt Lauren's house, surrounded by relatives throwing jabs and mocking comments, when everyone looked at you like you were nothing more than someone with an ordinary job, what would you have done? Would you have stood up like I did and said the truth out loud, that you are the co-founder of 21 coffee shops, and let the facts speak for themselves? Or would you have stayed silent, taken the mockery, and kept to yourself the peace you have worked so hard to protect all these years? Leave your thoughts in the comments below this story. I would love to hear them. And if anything I shared today felt familiar, do not forget to hit that subscribe button so we can meet again in the following story. Thank you for listening. When I refused to pay the $4,250 bill at my niece's 8th birthday party, my dad looked me straight in the eye with a cold, hard stare and said, "It's shameful to have someone so selfish in the family. Get out of here." After those cruel words, I decided to draw a final boundary with my family. But they didn't stop there. My sister went on to deliberately sabotage my career. Faced with that kind of betrayal, I had no choice but to take them to court. So come with me into the story of what happened after that birthday party. Because in the following months, I learned one of the most important lessons of my life. That sometimes, loving yourself means letting go of the people you love the most. Hello, everyone. My name is Carson. I'm 34 years old and a software engineer living in Los Angeles. 3 months ago, I filed a lawsuit against my sister for defamation. At the same time, I cut ties with both my parents because they chose to side with her during the legal battle. It might sound wild, a 34-year-old man taking his sister to court. But after you hear the whole story, I believe you'll understand why I had no choice. It all started on a Sunday afternoon in early March. That day, I drove from downtown to Ontario to attend my niece's birthday party, Emma, Jessica's 8-year-old daughter. A little over a week earlier, I was in my office working on a pretty complex software project when my phone buzzed with a call from Jessica. She said in her usual friendly tone, "Next Sunday is Emma's 8th birthday. Try to make it to her party. Okay? I'll text you the time and place." Without hesitation, I said, "Of course, I'll be there on time." For the next week, I spent much time thinking about the perfect gift for Emma. I wanted to get her something special, something a girl her age would love. After research, I decided on a premium role-play doll set that cost nearly $300. It was a complete collection with various outfits, accessories, and scenes so Emma could create endless stories with her imagination. Holding the carefully wrapped pink gift box in my hands, I truly believed she'd be excited. I imagined we'd have a warm, joyful birthday celebration like always. I didn't know that this would be the last party I'd ever sit through with the people I once called family. At exactly 5:30 in the evening, I arrived at the Golden Palace restaurant in Ontario. It's a relatively upscale place with a spacious layout, perfect for large family gatherings. Emma spotted me from across the room when I walked through the door. She immediately ran over with the biggest smile, threw her arms around me, and shouted excitedly, "Uncle Carson, you're here. I've been waiting for you all afternoon." I gently patted her head and smiled back, saying, "Hey, sweetheart, happy 8th birthday. I've got a special gift for you, but you'll have to wait until the present time to open it." Emma squealed, "You're the best, Uncle Carson. I love you the most in the whole family." Hearing those words and seeing that smile made me feel genuinely happy. In that moment, I felt like I had done the right thing. Once Emma ran off, I looked around the restaurant, surprised by how many people were there. The party was much bigger than I expected. I saw relatives I hadn't seen in years, Aunt Susan from San Diego, Uncle David from Phoenix, even some old family friends. The space was decorated with pink and purple balloons, and in the center of the main table sat a massive birthday cake that looked like a wedding cake. A quick count told me there were nearly 40 people at the party. That struck me as odd because Jessica had never thrown such an extravagant birthday party for Emma before. When I entered the central area, my dad walked over from one of the tables. With a strange smile, he hugged me and said, "It's been a while. Whether Emma has a good day today depends on you." Right after that, my mom came over too. She hugged me tightly and, in a somewhat eager tone, whispered, "Please don't do anything today that might upset Emma." Then Jessica and her husband came by to greet me. Jessica smiled and said, "Thanks for coming to Emma's party." I smiled back without saying much. Honestly, their words left me feeling a bit uneasy. There was something strange in how everyone spoke to me, like they were expecting something from me. Still, I didn't think too much of it. It had been a long time since I'd seen everyone, and I figured maybe this was their way of showing they cared. I didn't realize that I had just walked straight into a carefully laid trap. By 6 p.m., once all the guests had arrived, Jessica stood up from the main table wearing a formal red dress. She raised her glass of wine high and, with a glowing smile, roared, "Thank you all so much for taking the time to celebrate Emma's 8th birthday. I hope you enjoy a delicious and memorable evening." Everyone responded with a round of enthusiastic applause. That's when I finally noticed the printed menus, elegant paper placed neatly at each table. As I glanced over the list of dishes, I couldn't help but feel shocked. These weren't your typical kids' birthday party foods. They were upscale and expensive. Grilled lobster with garlic butter, Wagyu steak, roasted Alaskan salmon, and imported wines from France and Italy. It felt less like a birthday party and more like a high-end wedding reception. Seeing all that made me suddenly remember Jessica's financial situation. Her husband, Jordan, had been unemployed for 6 months since getting laid off from his construction job. Jessica herself worked an office job that barely paid enough to support a family of 3. Just 2 months earlier, I remembered clearly. Dad had even suggested that Jessica and Jordan move back in with our parents to save money on rent. Things were genuinely tight for them back then. So, how were they able to throw a party this extravagant now? It didn't make sense, and I couldn't wrap my head around it. As a team of professional servers brought out the first dishes, the atmosphere in the restaurant grew more lively. The guests couldn't stop marveling at how fancy everything was. Aunt Susan looked at her lobster dish and said, "Oh my, this looks amazing." Jessica went all out with this party. Uncle David nodded in agreement and added, "Absolutely. It's been ages since I've had anything this fancy." Jessica's family knows how to treat their guests. Looking over at the main table, I saw my parents smiling widely, clearly pleased by all the compliments. Mom was chatting animatedly with a group of older aunts, while Dad proudly told the men nearby how successful his daughter was. But there was something in their expressions that made me uneasy. They kept glancing at me, those strange, expectant looks, as if they were waiting for something. At the time, I still didn't realize that the trap had already been set, and I was the only target in that entire room. Around 7 p.m., while everyone was enjoying dessert, cheerful music suddenly started playing over the sound system. Right then, a clown in a brightly colored costume with a fully painted face appeared through the restaurant's back entrance. The kids at the party instantly burst into excited screams. Emma and the other children jumped up from their seats, clapping and shouting, "The clown! The clown is here!" With a cheerful, professional voice, the clown approached Emma and began singing "Happy Birthday" at the top of his lungs. Immediately, the entire restaurant joined in, singing with smiles and applause. The room filled with a warm, festive energy as everyone clapped to the beat. After the song, the clown stood beside Emma as she blew out the candles on her two-tier birthday cake. The soft glow of 8 little flames lit up her joyful face. The kids around her counted down, 1, 2, 3, and Emma blew them all out to cheers and applause. Next, the clown led the kids through a series of fun games, then posed for photos with Emma and each family attending the party. A professional camera flashed nonstop, capturing every special moment. Watching the whole scene unfold, I was stunned. Hiring a professional clown and a photographer, plus the upscale menu and a premium venue like this, the party had to cost at least $4,000. That number hit me hard. It was more than what many people made in a whole month. Seeing everything in front of me, I couldn't help but wonder if Jessica had hit the lottery or come into some unexpected money. Based on what I knew about their financial situation, there was simply no way they could afford a party this extravagant. After the clown left to a final round of applause, everyone settled back into their seats to enjoy dessert. The room still buzzed with the warm, cheerful energy left over from the performance. Then came the most exciting part of the night, Emma opening her presents. When she carefully peeled back the pink wrapping paper and saw the role-play doll set I had gotten her, her eyes lit up like 2 shining diamonds. With a thrilled voice, she hugged the gift tightly and said, "Oh my gosh, Uncle Carson, I love this so much. This is the exact doll set I've been dreaming about." Immediately, the guests nearby leaned in to look at the beautifully detailed collection. Aunt Paula admired it and said, "Carson has such great taste. That's a gorgeous and meaningful gift." Seeing the admiration in everyone's eyes, my dad beamed with pride and loudly declared, "Carson loves Emma so much. He's the one who paid for this whole party." After that, my mom nodded and said, "That's right, Carson cares about the family. He was happy to pay for this amazing party for Emma." I froze. My heart dropped. I turned and stared at them, shocked and confused. I was about to speak up and correct them immediately, but when I looked around and saw nearly 50 guests still there, I knew I couldn't start an argument in front of everyone. In that moment, I told myself maybe it was just a joke. Maybe my parents were trying to show off a little, exaggerating things to make me look good in front of the relatives. I comforted myself with the thought that once everyone left, we'd laugh about it and chalk it up to a harmless bit of boasting. But how my family looked at me, the meaning behind those glances, told me something wasn't right. The next 30 minutes passed under a heavy, silent pressure. I sat there like a statue, my parents' words still echoing in my head. Guests continued glancing at me with admiration, but I felt increasingly uncomfortable instead of proud. Around 8 p.m., as the party atmosphere began to wind down, I stood up and walked over to Jessica. With a polite tone, I said, "Hey Jess, I think I'm gonna head out now. It's a long drive back to LA. I must be up early for work." Before leaving, I pulled out $500 from my wallet and handed it to her. In my mind, this was a thoughtful contribution toward the party, something that showed appreciation, family support, and love for my niece. But when Jessica saw the money in my hand, she looked at me with disbelief, like I had just insulted her. A few seconds later, she said, "$500? Are you kidding me?" I was stunned. I had no idea why she reacted that way. For a moment, I thought maybe she didn't want me to contribute. Perhaps she felt the gift I gave Emma was already enough. After a brief silence, I said, "Honestly, I planned to show up and celebrate, but you're my sister, and Emma's important to me. I wanted to contribute a little something." Jessica put a hand to her forehead, rubbing it like she held back a wave of frustration. Then, with a cold, sharp voice, she looked me straight and said, "Carson, today is Emma's birthday. She's your niece, our only niece. Don't be so selfish." Her words left me completely confused. I still didn't understand what she was expecting from me. Carefully, I asked, "What do you mean by that? I don't get it." Without missing a beat, she shot back, "Not 500. You're supposed to pay for the whole party." Every word hit me like a hammer. I froze in place. So that was it. She was angry because I didn't cover the entire bill. But Emma is my niece, not my daughter. And more importantly, no one ever told me I was expected to foot the cost of the event. I was invited as a regular guest. Now suddenly I was being told I should have paid for everything? It was beyond unreasonable. Not wanting to turn this into a scene in front of a crowded restaurant, I gave Jessica one last look, a look full of disappointment. Without saying another word, I turned and walked toward the exit, leaving her furious. At the time, I had no idea that walking out that door would set off a chain of events that would completely change my relationship with my family. A loud voice thundered behind me as I took just a few steps toward the restaurant's front door. "Carson, stop right there." I turned around instantly and saw my father storming out, his face flushed with anger. Behind him were my mother, Jessica, and Jordan. All of them wore serious, determined expressions. Before I could say anything, Dad marched up to me and said sternly, "Where do you think you're going? We need to talk now." The four of them quickly surrounded me and pulled me aside to a more private corner of the restaurant, out of view from the still curious guests inside. The air around us turned thick with tension. With a cold stare, Jessica spoke first. "Carson, you're responsible for paying for the entire party. After that, you can leave." Then my mother jumped in, her voice pleading but still heavy with pressure. "You have a stable income, and Jessica is struggling. You need to help your sister." Hearing that, my frustration boiled over. I looked at my mom and said bluntly, "If Jessica's struggling, why throw such an expensive party in the first place?" Before she could answer, Jordan cut in. "Carson, I know you're doing well. This party was to give Emma a birthday she'll never forget. She's been hoping for this for a long time." I shot back without hesitation. "If you wanted to give her a special birthday, maybe get a job and save for it. You've been unemployed for 6 months, just sitting around scrolling on your phone." Jordan fell silent. He had no comeback. Finally, my father stepped in, his tone commanding. "You will pay for the whole thing. This isn't about us. It's about Emma." Hearing all this, it felt like a storm erupted in my head. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own family had trapped me, planned this whole thing behind my back, thrown a lavish party without saying a word, then cornered me and demanded I foot the entire bill. Their justifications felt fake, manipulative. Why not plan a party within their means if this was for Emma? Why lie and ambush me like this? And worst of all, why use family love as a weapon? That's when it hit me. Deep down, they didn't see me as a respected family member. To them, I was just a walking ATM. That I had a good job was reason enough to exploit me. And the moment I said no, I instantly became selfish, the one who didn't care about family. A few seconds later, I answered with steady resolve, "No, I'm not paying for this party." Seeing that I still refused, my dad glared at me with a cold, threatening look and said, "If you walk away from this, you're no longer family. You'll lose all of us." Something inside me snapped, but instead of yelling, I stayed calm. I looked each of them in the eye and said, "Fine. If this is what family looks like, I don't need it." That's when Dad completely lost it. With a furious yell, he shouted, "It's shameful to have someone so selfish in the family. Get out of here." Staring into his angry eyes, I knew there was no point in saying another word. Without hesitation, I reached into Jessica's hand and snatched back the $500, catching her completely off guard. Then I turned around and walked out, not looking back even once, leaving behind a stunned, furious family frozen in place. After leaving the restaurant, I returned to my downtown Los Angeles apartment. The entire ride home was wrapped in silence, just the engine's hum and the storm of thoughts swirling in my head. When I got home, I pulled into the garage and rushed straight to the bathroom. I needed to cool off, literally. My whole body was burning with rage. I let the cold water run over me, but it did nothing to extinguish the fire I felt inside. After the shower, I made a strong cup of black coffee and sat on the small balcony. Night fell over Los Angeles, and the city lights shimmered in the distance. But my mind was far too unsettled to enjoy the view. My father's words replayed in my head like some haunting soundtrack. "We won't be a family anymore." Each time I heard it in my mind, it felt like a knife digging deeper, because I knew this wasn't the first time my family had chosen Jessica over me. The pain from tonight's party dragged me back to memories I had tried to bury. Growing up, the favoritism was always there. I was constantly expected to give in to Jessica, even though she was 2 years older than I. Later, when I earned a scholarship to a prestigious university on the East Coast, my parents urged me to stay close to home to save money. However, when Jessica wanted to attend college in another city, they supported her fully, even taking out loans to help pay for it. Even as adults, the pattern never stopped. When Jessica ran into financial trouble after having Emma, my parents immediately asked me to step in and help. When Jordan lost his job, I was expected to support my brother-in-law. But when I reached significant milestones in my career or personal life, all I ever got was a passing comment, before they quickly shifted the conversation back to Jessica. Sitting alone in the dark, I asked the same questions repeatedly. When would they stop favoring Jessica? When would I be seen as someone with feelings and the right to choose, not just a financial safety net for the family? Would there ever be a day when they looked at me as a respected family member, instead of someone expected to sacrifice for it? In the silence of the night, I realized I had been alone my entire life, even within my own family. The sad irony is that, for all their favoritism toward Jessica, they were still spending my money. Every month, I had been sending my parents $700 without fail. No one forced me to do it, it was something I chose. With my annual post-tax income close to $150,000, I saw it as a reasonable way to support them. That amount wasn't much for me, but for them, it could be saved for retirement or used for emergencies. I always believed that caring for your parents was a natural responsibility, a given when you're someone's child. But after what happened that night, after hearing them say I was no longer family, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I opened my banking app and canceled the automatic $700 monthly transfer without hesitation. Pressing that cancel button gave me a strange feeling of relief and heartbreak. At the same time, I opened my laptop and started making a list of every loan they had taken from me over the years. I only included the ones for which I still had text messages, just in case I needed proof. August 2019. Mom borrowed $2,000 to fix the roof after a storm. February 2020. Jessica borrowed $3,000 to stay afloat during the pandemic. April 2021. Mom borrowed $3,000 to buy a used car. October 2022. Jessica borrowed $1,000 to cover hospital bills when Emma had pneumonia. June 2024. Dad borrowed $1,500 to renovate the front yard and upgrade the kitchen. Aside from those, there were countless smaller loans, all of which I still had messages for. After carefully going through everything, I ended up with the following totals. Dad owed me $4,800. Mom owed me $9,000. Jessica owed me $13,500. Staring at the total on my laptop screen, $27,300, I felt dizzy. That wasn't pocket change, and not once had any of them ever brought up paying it back. In that moment, I knew what I had to do the very next day. That would be fine if they wanted to treat me like I was no longer family. I would start handling things as if we were strangers. The next morning, around 10 a.m., an email landed in my inbox while I was in the middle of my workday at the office. The sender? Golden Palace Restaurant. I knew immediately what it was about. The email from Golden Palace laid out the full cost of Emma's birthday party from the night before. The number, $4,250, flashed on my screen. I wasn't surprised. I had already guessed the price tag by looking at the menu and the services they offered. Below is the main message, a detailed breakdown of the charges and instructions for how to pay. Without hesitation, I typed a short, direct reply stating that I had no involvement in organizing the event and completely refused to pay. Reading the email, I could easily guess what happened after leaving. They didn't have the money to cover the bill. So instead, they must have told the restaurant I was the financial sponsor of the event and pushed the payment onto me. By lunchtime, my phone buzzed with a call from my father. Curious to hear what he had to say, I answered. Without greeting, he barked into the phone. Furious. Why didn't you pay for the party? Hearing that blunt question, I couldn't help but let out a short laugh. Then, calmly but cuttingly, I said, "Did you forget? You told me we're not family anymore." And with that, I hung up and immediately blocked his number. I also blocked my mother, Jessica, and Jordan across every platform. But as I sat in my quiet office, I knew this wasn't the end. They weren't going to walk away quietly. Not when there was $4,250 still hanging in the air. By 5 p.m., after wrapping up my shift, I drove straight to the law office of Kevin, my best friend since high school. These days, Kevin works as a civil litigation attorney at a small firm in West Hollywood. When he saw me walk into his office, he looked genuinely surprised. It wasn't like me to show up on a weekday like this. Usually, we'd grab dinner or a beer over the weekend. I sat down in the leather chair across from his desk and laid out everything, from Emma's birthday party and the confrontation with my family, to the email from Golden Palace that morning. Once I finished, Kevin leaned back in his chair and, with his usual biting sarcasm, said, "Damn, your family's got style. Set a trap and shake you down like it's tax season." I gave a dry laugh. That's just how Kevin is. brutally honest with a sharp tongue. Cutting straight to the point, he looked me in the eye and asked, "So what do you want me to do? Spit it out. I've got dinner with my wife." That's when I told him about the $27,300 my family had borrowed over the years and never paid back. I pulled up the detailed list and showed him screenshots of all the messages as proof. Kevin stared at the total, then shook his head. "You don't look like an idiot, but you gave money like one. 27 grand and not a single follow-up." I didn't take offense. That was Kevin being Kevin. He never sugarcoated anything, not even with me. Then he opened his laptop and walked me through drafting a formal notice to send to each family member via certified mail. He explained that a written notice carries legal weight, and if they failed to respond within a specific time frame, I'd have solid ground to pursue legal action. Holding the freshly printed letter, I felt a strange sense of calm. I planned to stop by the post office the next morning and mail a copy to each of them, demanding repayment as soon as possible. For the first time in 2 days, I felt like I was finally doing the right thing and taking control of the situation on my terms. Around 7 p.m., just as I turned onto the street leading to my home, I spotted 4 familiar silhouettes standing in front of my door. My entire family was there. When I backed my car into the garage, they rushed forward and surrounded it. Without any greeting, my father, his face red with rage, shouted, "Are you going to pay for the party? The restaurant's coming after me." Then my mother stepped in, her voice trembling with desperation, her eyes brimming with tears. "Please just help the family this one time. I'm begging you." Jessica wasn't far behind. She walked up, her voice urgent and pleading. "Can't you do it for Emma? She loves you the most. Do you want to hurt her like this?" I didn't respond. I stayed completely silent. Instead, I reached into my bag and handed each of them a copy of the formal notice Kevin had helped me draft. The moment they started reading, the color drained from their faces. They couldn't believe I was demanding repayment for their borrowed money. After a long pause, my father raised the paper in his shaking hand and growled, "You're seriously asking for money from the people who raised you? Do you even have a conscience?" Jessica wasn't any gentler. She stared at me with bitterness and snapped, "You're heartless. You know we're struggling, and you're still demanding money." My mother could only cry. She sobbed uncontrollably, too overwhelmed to speak. Watching the scene unfold, I felt something harden inside me. My voice was cold and firm as I said, "You'll each receive a formal notice in the mail tomorrow. You have 30 days to repay the money. Leave now, unless you want me to call the police for trespassing." Without waiting for a response, I turned, walked into my house, and locked the door behind me, tuning out the sobs and curses still echoing from the driveway. They knew I wasn't bluffing. A few minutes later, the noise outside faded, and I heard footsteps walking away. After my firm stance and the demand for repayment, I thought they'd back off, or at least sit down to talk things out like adults. But I was utterly wrong about Jessica. My sister decided to go nuclear in a way I never imagined. The next morning, while I was focused on work at the office, my phone buzzed with a message from my boss, Mr. Anderson. It was short and to the point. "Carson, check this link ASAP. Call me after you've seen it." I clicked the link, and it took me to a Facebook group called Family Drama Stories, a massive page with over 500,000 members. People there post personal family conflicts looking for support, sympathy, or advice. But what left me stunned was the content of the post. Jessica had written a long public story using my full name, Carson Miller, along with the name of the company I work for, Tech Solutions LA, and its address. She didn't bother to hide anything. In her post, she painted me as cruel and heartless. She wrote, "My younger brother, Carson Miller, who works at Tech Solutions LA, tricked me into planning a big birthday party for my daughter. He said he'd cover it, but then left me stuck with a $4,250 bill. It gets worse. He's now demanding $27,000 back from our family. Money he previously claimed was a gift. Our parents are elderly, and I'm a struggling single mom. He has no compassion, and now he's threatening legal action." Scrolling down, the comments section made it even worse. Thousands of people had shared, liked, and posted scathing remarks, most aimed directly at me. Some had even gone to the company's Facebook page to leave negative reviews and comments. This is who Tech Solutions hires? Disgusting. I'd never do business with a company that employs someone like Carson Miller. After reading the post, I immediately called Anderson. His tone was serious. "Carson, I'm not trying to meddle in your personal life," he began. But this is affecting the company now. Clients are asking questions, and we're getting negative feedback from a few partners. He added, before I could say anything, I'm approving 2 days off for you. Take the time. You must get ahead before it escalates and damages your career. After the call, I sat there staring at the screen, hundreds of angry comments piling up by the minute. That's when it hit me. Jessica didn't just want money. She tried to ruin my name, ruin everything I had built. And now this wasn't just a family issue anymore. It was war. Right after the call with my boss, I couldn't sit still anymore. I closed my laptop, asked for the rest of the day off, and drove straight to Kevin's office. Kevin looked at me with concern when I showed up for the second time in just 2 days. Before he could speak, I handed him my phone and showed him Jessica's Facebook post. He read silently, occasionally shaking his head and letting out frustrated sighs. After scrolling through the post and hundreds of nasty comments, he finally set the phone on his desk. With a serious tone, Kevin said, "Your sister's lost it. She just committed clear defamation." Then I told him about the call with my boss, about how the company was feeling the heat from clients and partners. Kevin listened quietly, jotting down notes in his legal pad. Once I finished, he opened his laptop and pulled up California's defamation laws. He explained that Jessica had crossed a serious legal line. She publicly shared my full name and workplace and made false accusations that could damage my career. Kevin warned me that filing a lawsuit would destroy any remaining family ties. But after everything that had happened, I felt like I had nothing left to salvage. With final resolve, I said, "File the suit, Kevin. They've gone too far." Kevin nodded and got to work. He walked me through what I'd need: screenshots of every comment, a saved copy of the original post, and documentation of any harm I could prove: professional, financial, reputational. While we worked, Kevin reminded me to brace myself. Jessica had already shown she'd stop at nothing. This wouldn't be the end of it. When I left Kevin's office with the drafted complaint, I knew I had just stepped into a war with no way back. I authorized Kevin to officially file the lawsuit in civil court, charging Jessica with defamation and reputational harm. Kevin assured me he'd handle every step of the legal process with complete professionalism. But that night, I decided I wouldn't just sit back and stay quiet. I went straight to Jessica's original Facebook post and hit back, this time with screenshots. Each message clearly showed a timeline of money borrowed by my family over the years, complete with dates, amounts, and the reasons they gave for needing it. Alongside those images, I clarified that I had never agreed to pay for Emma's birthday party. I was invited as a guest, just like everyone else, and even brought a thoughtful gift. Once I posted the evidence, social media lit up. The online crowd split into two camps. One side backed me after seeing the undeniable proof of loans never repaid. The other continued to side with Jessica. Arguments and comment wars flared up for 2 days before the drama faded, as new gossip grabbed the internet's attention. Then came the shocker. Just 3 days after receiving her court summons, Jessica made an unexpected move. She deleted the original post like it never existed, and then wiped her entire Facebook account. When I told Kevin, he laughed and said confidently, "She's panicking. Deleting everything means she knows she messed up. We've got this one in the bag." Kevin explained that removing the post didn't erase her legal responsibility. We had already archived everything. Deleting it could even be seen as a sign of guilt. Hearing that, I felt something I hadn't in days: satisfaction. Not revenge. Just the strange, quiet relief of knowing I was finally being listened to, and for once, the truth was on my side. 1 month after the debt notice was sent, the $27,300 remained unpaid. Not a single call, message, or sign came from my family. They showed no intention of honoring their obligations. So again, Kevin filed a case, a formal debt recovery lawsuit in civil court. Just a week ago, the court date was set. The judge decided to merge the two cases, defamation and debt recovery, into a single proceeding to save time and legal costs. As I walked into the courtroom on the day of the trial, I saw my entire family seated. My parents sat in the front row, looking noticeably older than the last time I saw them. My mom kept dabbing her eyes with tissues while my dad sat stiffly, his face unreadable. Jessica sat beside her attorney, visibly tense and avoiding eye contact with me the entire time. Jordan was silent, occasionally touching her shoulder to comfort her. Kevin laid out the case calmly and precisely when it was our turn. He presented the whole timeline and supporting evidence of the loans, each message, each amount, every screenshot organized chronologically. Then he moved on to the defamation, showing Jessica's Facebook post in full with my full name, workplace, and the false accusations visible. Their attorney tried to argue that the money had been gifts between family members, but Kevin shut that down quickly by presenting messages where the word borrow appeared repeatedly and unambiguously. As for the defamation, Jessica claimed she was merely sharing her feelings and didn't intend to harm me, but that defense fell apart under the weight of evidence. She had publicly posted my name, employer, and lies that had affected my reputation. After 2 hours of testimony and deliberation, the judge delivered the verdict. Jessica was ordered to pay $25,000 in damages for defamation and $13,500 in unpaid personal debt. My father was responsible for $4,800. My mother, $9,000. On top of that, they were all required to cover attorney's fees and court costs. Payment was due within 90 days of the judgment. As the decision was read, my mother broke down into sobs. My father sat motionless, like a stone. Jessica's face went pale. I just sat there, silent, feeling a strange mix of relief and emptiness. Justice had been served, but at the cost of losing an entire family. It's been a week since the court ruling. My life is slowly settling into its usual rhythm, but news of my family keeps finding its way to me. From what I've heard through relatives, my parents are now applying for a mortgage on their house to come up with the money they owe me. On the other hand, Jessica has had to sell her car and several valuable belongings to cover her portion of the settlement. Over the past week, a few relatives have called me. Some have harshly criticized me, saying I was heartless for taking my family to court. Aunt Susan even said I had lost all compassion and didn't deserve to be called human. But not everyone judged me. Uncle David called to tell me he believed I did the right thing by standing up for myself. He said Jessica's public defamation crossed every imaginable line, and he admired me for not letting it slide. Sitting alone in my quiet apartment every night, I wonder if I went too far. But then I remember what it felt like on Emma's birthday. The betrayal. Being treated like an ATM by the people who were supposed to love me. And above all, the public attack that threatened to destroy my career. In those moments, I know I didn't have a choice. Sometimes, loving and respecting yourself means making difficult decisions. And sometimes, drawing a firm line is the only way to protect yourself from the people willing to use family as a weapon. But what about you? What do you think? Was I too harsh when suing my parents and sister? Or was it a necessary step to protect myself? Share your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to hear what others think about this story. And if you found meaning in my experience, don't forget to subscribe, hit like, and share this with someone who might need to hear it too. Thank you for listening to my story. I'll see you in the next one.